Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. That will never work. How many ideas have come to fruition despite these words? Today, Netflix co-founder and former CEO Marc Randolph joins me to share the untold story of how Netflix went from concept to company. Now with over 150 million subscribers, Netflix feels like a Goliath, but it began as a scrappy startup with naysayers and obstacles at every turn. Marc's new book, That Will Never Work, is a first-person account of the birth of one of the most successful tech startups ever. In today's conversation, we talk about why some great ideas stick and others don't, why there's no formula for innovation, and what happens when your little idea becomes a multi-billion-dollar business. If you have an idea or a dream that you want to make real, this episode is for you. Here's my conversation with Marc Randolph. Marc Randolph, what a treat to have you on. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about so much. You're a busy man, and to take a minute for us and our listeners, I'm super grateful. So thanks.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Happy to be with you.
So the book, That Will Never Work, really cool title. Tell me, why you wanted to write this book, and what do you want, most importantly, readers to take away?
Well, it's a good question. And, people are usually a little surprised that I'm writing a book about Netflix 16 years after I left there. And it's because it took me 16 years to kind of get perspective on what we really accomplish. And more importantly, what was my role in all of this? And so part of what I'm trying to do with That'll Never Work is, number one, is kind of tell that untold story of Netflix. People have these impressions sometimes that these big successful companies spring fully formed from some moment of divine inspiration. But in fact, they don't. Their births are usually complicated and difficult. And we struggled for a long time. There's stories about us being in these crappy little office with dirty green carpet, had to bring our own furniture in. It's a weird dynamic that it's not always been the global company. But there's another reason I kind of wrote the book, which is that since leaving Netflix, I've been scratching my entrepreneurial itch by working with early stage entrepreneurs and working with lots of people who aren't even want to be entrepreneurs. They just have ideas they want to make real. And I kind of realized that all these tips and tricks and secrets that I've learned over 40 years as an entrepreneur are the exact same things that anybody could use if they're trying to make their dream come true, so to speak.
What would you say, Marc, are some of the biggest myths about innovation? And you touched on it a minute there, but I've heard you talk about it before. Can you share that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that people think that innovation is something which has some formula to it. And that all of a sudden it's just a matter of coming up with a new idea. But so much of innovation is cultural and persistence, and recognizing that the ideas you come up with are most likely going to be bad ideas. And what innovation is just a process of trying one bad idea after another and hopefully gleaning some little insight from it that gives you some approach for what you're going to try next. And the other big issue with innovation is some people think that there's some magic career in being an entrepreneur or being an innovator. And it's not necessarily about the outcome. It's about the process. And there's something tremendously fun about coming into work every day and solving a problem that has never really been addressed before.
Sure. And getting comfortable with the speed bumps along the way is what I'm hearing you say.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's why you do it.
Sure.
Not because you want to suffer and be uncomfortable. Who wants that? But because it's that very nature of everything worked the first time, I can't imagine anything more boring than that. What you're doing is you're saying, wow, here's this kind of interesting idea this problem that really, I can't believe this problem still exists. There's got to be a way to figure this out. And I promise you, your first swing at it is going to be a big miss, because it takes this long process of iteration to really understand your problem well enough to get to a point you can actually solve it. And that's the fun of it. It's like doing a crossword puzzle, like doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, where you pick a day, you pick Saturday, and you go, my God, I'm imagining there probably is a solution, but wow, I'm not going to get this at first. And we have to put this puzzle down for a day or two and see what magically seeps into my mind for what to try next. But boy, when you finally solve it, what a great feeling of accomplishment.
Sure, absolutely.
Not that I've ever solved a Saturday Times crossword puzzle.
I was going to say, I know. I think my mom still rocks those, which is amazing.
Yeah, probably in pen.
Yeah, exactly. So some of our listeners maybe have heard the origin story, right, of Netflix. And in the book, you share the full story, which is really cool. But can you share and give our listeners some context of what, and you just touched on it a minute, of the original idea of Netflix, right? What it was, and then where it, and really where it came from, from that origin story.
Well, the thing is, when you say many of my listeners have heard the story, what they've probably heard is the apocryphal story that it came from this moment of anguish over a late fee on a movie. We got a $40 late fee on Apollo 13 and thought there's got to be a better way. And then boom, Netflix originated. But in fact, origin stories are very, very rarely as simple and one-dimensional as that. Netflix is no different. And in fact, yes, perhaps Reed did have a late fee on a movie, but there was so many other things went into it. And in particular, what was happening is that Reed and I were both about to lose our jobs. The company that Reed had started and was running and that I was working for was being acquired. And both of us said, what's next? And I said, I'm going to start another company. And I had done 5 previous startups. In fact, that's why I was working at Reed's company. He had acquired my most recent startup. And I said, this is great. I'm going to take this time and start the next company. And Reed, he didn't want to start another company. He was going to go and change the world of education. So he wanted to go back and get a higher degree in education, and he was going back to school. But he wanted to keep a hand in this entrepreneurial thing. So we decided that he'd be the angel investor, he'd be the chairman of the board, and I would start and run it. And we had to find the idea. And interestingly enough, it wasn't that both of us were video buffs. In fact, we had very pedestrian video tastes. It was more that we were brainstorming all kinds of crazy ideas. And my only criteria was that it involved selling something on the internet. And if it could be personalized, that would be bonus points. And so as Reed and I would commute to work every day, we would brainstorm ideas. Or more accurately, I would pitch him on my latest brainstorms. And one of them was, for example, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this one, it was a personalized shampoo, where you mail us a little lock of your hair, and our hair scientists formulate the custom shampoo just for you, and then we deliver it to you once a month as a subscription. And Reed didn't really dig that one very much. So then I said, okay, how about this one? How about custom dog food formulated for the breed and the age and the gender and the geographic region? And that also, had all kinds of problems with it. And then the other idea I pitched him was video rental by mail. Big category. It was like an $8 billion category. And the market leader, Blockbuster, was pretty obvious, had left a lot of room to improve the customer experience, let's just say. Mm-hmm. The flaw, which I found out really quickly after I began researching this, was that back then, and you may remember this, video came on VHS cassettes, not on DVDs, and they were big and heavy. And so this idea went out the window the same way the custom shampoo and the personalized dog food did, until one of those lucky breaks. Whereas about a month later, Reed heard about this new technology called a DVD. It was a little thing for movies, and it was thin and light. And it was like getting this amazing idea all of a sudden laid in your lap. I mean, actually it was closer to that feeling where you're cleaning up, and under the sofa, you find the missing jigsaw puzzle piece. And you instantly go, what is this? And you go, oh, I know what that is. That's the piece that completes this other puzzle I've been working on for a month. And lo and behold, that the DVD might solve all the flaws of the old video by mail idea. And of course, we said, well, listen, rather than just thinking about it, and then we acted like a true entrepreneur, and rather than thinking about it for another 2 years or working on a business plan or even putting together a pitch deck, we said, let's figure out how valid this idea really is. And so we turned our car around mid-commute and went down to Santa Cruz to buy a DVD. And of course, no DVDs to be had. It was still in test market. So we figured, well, maybe a used CD will do. And we bought a used music CD and then went a couple doors down and got a little gift envelope like you'd mail a greeting card in, and went to the Santa Cruz post office and put the CD in the envelope and put a stamp on it and mailed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz. And the next day, when he came to pick me up for the commute, he didn't even need to say anything. He just kind of held up a little disc with an unbroken CD in it that had gotten to his house in less than 24 hours for the price of a stamp. And if there was an inciting event, as we say in screenwriter speak, that was probably it. Reed wrote us the check, and I hired a dozen people, and we spent 6 months building a website you could probably put together in a couple minutes these days. And boom, off we went.
And so early on, you were obviously pitching ideas, whether it was to Reed, but as a startup, obviously you have to get pretty good at pitching, right?
Absolutely.
What advice do you have for people around how to kind of make the ask, right? How to pitch your story as it relates to the problem that you're maybe trying to solve for someone else?
Well, this was a tough one. Every single person that we pitched to said the same thing, which is, that will never work, which is exactly why I've named the book That Will Never Work, because I've heard that so many times. But every person who is pitching a new idea hears that. And, you're right. Obviously Reed was going to put in the lion's share of the money, but he wanted it to be validated. So we pitched a bunch of other people, including my mom. Mm-hmm. And as I kind of went through this process, I realized that I had learned something a long time ago that ended up being what I believe is the most important lesson when you're pitching to someone. And this lesson had come when I was doing a orientation for this wilderness program that I was working for that took inner city kids out into the mountains to go backpacking and climbing, and totally would put them in these disorienting situations. So they decided to train us. They would try and put us in a disorienting situation, and which is how I found myself one weekend on the streets of Hartford, Connecticut, with no wallet, no money, no ID, no prearranged place to stay or no food, with the promise I'd be picked up 3 days later.
Wow.
And which, of course, you'd be arrested if someone tried to do their orientation training like that. But this was a different era. But it was interesting because it was great for the first, half a day. And then I got hungry. And so the first thing I did was, I was a pigeon, which meant that I'd hover around the food court. And then as soon as someone got up from their tray and without bussing it, I'd swoop in and eat whatever leftover French fries were on the plate. And then I said, this is kind of disgusting. I should just cut out the middleman. And this is getting to the point. I decided I'm going to panhandle. And, Molly, I know that you've made a lot of hard asks, but I don't know whether you ever panhandled before.
I actually have a story for that, but yes, go ahead.
It is the hardest thing because you are asking for something for nothing.
Right.
Give me money and I have nothing for you.
Right.
And you go out in the street and you go, how hard could this be? And the answer is brutally hard. But you try and try and try and everyone shuns you. And then finally you stumble into what works. And what works is being genuine, not spinning, not doing a song and dance, not trying to second guess what someone wants, but just being honest. And in the case of panhandling, it was, I could really use some money because I'm really hungry. And it connected with people. And bringing it back, when you ask for money, you're doing the same thing. You're saying, I've got this crazy idea that no one thinks will work, but I can't do it without the funding. And I'm hungry. And once you've panhandled for spare change, asking for $25,000 from your mom is nothing.
Well, but you're right. Authenticity works and relationships work. I was taking my daughter to a basketball game one morning early, and we were on our way, and I had forgotten my purse, and I'm going through Chick-fil-A to get her something as we head to the game. And of course, I wanted her to have something in her stomach before the game, and I go to the drive-thru and I don't have anything. And my daughter said, well, we got to go, Mom. Don't do that. Don't you dare ask. And I said, no, it's Chick-fil-A. They're awesome. We come through here all the time. I probably know the lady at the window. And she was mortified. And I ordered, and then I pulled up and I said, you're not going to believe this. And to your exact point, I told her the truth. And I said, I'll be back tomorrow. I promise you, I will bring you double if you can just help get a little something in the belly of my little miracle here for a basketball game. And she, as Chick-fil-A often does, hooked me up. So, but it was fantastic. Uncomfortable and hard and weird. So tell me this, we had Patty McCord on the show. And so fast forward, right? So you've built this foundation. You have this incredible idea with Reed. You're launching Netflix. And Patty obviously headed up HR at Netflix and really codified the culture as the company grew in many ways. So in the early years, how much did you think about culture, and what was your approach to it? Patty talks about freedom and responsibility, and maybe you can touch on that a bit as you're growing what was once small to obviously a large organization.
So the answer is I think about culture all the time. It's critical, but not in the way maybe you think. It isn't like I sat down before we started Netflix and wrote out these aspirational policies. Because culture, and Patty, I know would agree with me, culture is not what you say. It's not what you write down. It's not what you pronounce. It's not what you carve into your cornerstone of your building. Culture is what you do. It's how you act.
Love that.
And more importantly, culture almost always springs from how the founders act, how they treat each other, how they treat themselves, how they treat their employees and their vendors and their customers. And people model off of that. And so what Patty was remarkable about was recognizing what this culture was and helping us make sure that it scaled beyond 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, but ultimately scaled to 7,000 people. But these cultural things at Netflix, even freedom and responsibility, was there from the very beginning. Radical honesty was there from the very beginning. Because both of those things were how the founders, how Reed and I acted. And a fair amount of this comes from all the time. I'm a big outdoors person. It came from so much of the time that I spent in the outdoors, where you don't know what the route is going to be. You don't necessarily know what you're going to run into. You don't know what you're going to encounter. And you have to give people this tremendous freedom to address problems as they come up using whatever skills and experience they have, as opposed to saying there's a preordained path and way to do it. And at any startup, it's going to be like that, because there's 100 things you need to do. There's 50 people you could use to do them. You've got 10. So you don't have time to say, all right, Molly, here's exactly what I need you to do. And I check in with you at the end of the day. And you just go, okay, Molly, see that mountain over there? I will meet you on the top in 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And here's what I need you to have with you.
Right.
And then I'm going to go, not even think about it again. And I'm going to trust that when 3 weeks from today, that you're going to come stumbling and collapsing onto the summit and bruised and bloodied maybe, but you're going to open the bag and you're going to have everything in it that you're expected of you. And I don't ask, what did you run into something you didn't expect? I knew that you did, and I knew you solved it in your own. And that is what a startup is. And that culture is part of almost every startup. But what happens that screws us is that you have 10 people and you got 100 people, and all of a sudden someone shows up 2 days late, and you go, ooh, that's not good. And then you go, all right, everyone gather around. We can't have this happen. So everyone's got to check in with me once a week, and I need you all to write a status report. And then someone spends a little bit too much money getting to the summit, And they go, oh, wait a minute, everybody, from now on, I need you to approve all your expenses. And pretty soon you begin building all these guardrails so that people don't make misjudgments. And then all of a sudden, all these people who were having this amazing experience, solving their own problems with the responsibility of actually accomplishing what they need to accomplish, all of a sudden feels, I'm not sure it's a word, infantilized or, treated like a child.
Like there's these massive guardrails on them.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think what Patty was brilliant at, and what Netflix has been brilliant at, is saying this insight. Oh, actually, here's a story. I'm not even sure Patty told this, and stop me if she did. But there was this time, Patty and I actually worked together at a previous company called Borland, a big software company. And like all the big software companies at the time, there was this thing about having the big corporate campus, with the squash courts and the cafeteria and the a ridiculousness, basketball, tennis courts, Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a hot tub. Seriously. And one time, Patty and I were coming back from lunch, and we see the hot tub's occupied, and it's a bunch of the engineers, the programmers. So we go over to say hello, and as we come up, they are bitching about the company.
Wow.
And as Patty and I were walking away, we're going, what is wrong with this picture? That we gave them a hot tub, and they're still sitting in the hot tub bitching about the company. But it spun it in its head when he began saying, well, what is it then that makes people want to work someplace if it's not the beanbag chairs and the kombucha on tap and all the other crap that people think does it? And we realized that it was, for the most part, treating people like an adult. It was giving them real responsibility, but then also giving them the freedom. And we didn't call it that then. But it's what we all recognize, this is the kind of company we want. And it's what Netflix has been phenomenally good at doing. And, I did it when we had 70, and I was still able to do it when we had 70. And then Patty helped us do it when we had 700. And Netflix now has 7,000.
Wow,
it's
awesome.
It's really a secret weapon.
Well, and you marry that with radical candor so that, because some people listening might say, hey, that's amazing. Give them freedom, give them responsibility. But, what happens when they make a mistake or two or three or five, right? And what I've heard you say is that's where the sort of radical candor, the radical honesty, if you will, comes in to provide that authentic, candid feedback, all in the spirit of helping them grow.
Absolutely right. And the radical candor, again, comes from how Reed and I treated each other. And it was one of the things that immediately made our relationship click is that starting even with those brainstorming sessions in the car, what was the point of Reed saying something like, oh, Mark, that's a really promising idea. That's bullshit. And we both know it. And so he'd say, here's what's wrong. And I'd say, no, you're wrong. I looked into this, and here's what I found out. And he'd go, well, yes, but have you considered this? And that continued. And there was these great times, actually. We'd have a bunch of people. We'd be in the conference room, and Reed and I are going at it, but in this completely wonderful way of trying to get to the bottom and deciding what's right. And all of a sudden, we'd look up and everyone's kind of has this look of horror on their face about why mommy and daddy are fighting. But it never occurred to us that that wasn't the best way to solve something, as long as once you realize what's self-evidently right, that you no longer think about whose idea it was or who was dug in where, that you just go, great, okay, that's the way to go. And that's the way to make great decisions.
In just a minute, we'll get back to today's show. But first, I want to share with you some exciting news. My new book, The Energy Clock, is hot off the press and available for pre-order now. Do you feel like you're always running low on energy? Do you find yourself giving your energy to the wrong people and the wrong things? Then pick up The Energy Clock and take control of your most important resource, your energy. In it, I show you how to start giving more of yourself to what's most important and how to stop wasting your time and resources on what's not. The Energy Clock hits stores on January 1 and you can pre-order it today. Visit theenergyclock.com for more information. So, Mark, I would imagine you've negotiated a lot, and I want to ask you some questions about that. But the first one is, what is your approach to negotiation? I mean, you've done it a ton, obviously, in the work that you do and the companies that you've started. How do you approach it?
People will say, "Oh, I'm a win-win guy," and I'm completely about win-win, and even I'm almost to a flaw. I really am doing my extreme best to be empathetic. I really want to understand exactly how the person I'm negotiating with is thinking about this. I want to be able to negotiate on their behalf against me if I needed to. I need to know that much about what's going to work for them. And sometimes that does make it harder in a way because you recognize there is incomplete information here. I know things they don't. I probably could take advantage of the situation, but it's never, in my opinion, a good long-term situation to have anybody. People always say they don't want to have anyone walk away from a negotiation feeling badly, and that's way too shallow and objective. People shouldn't recognize 2 years later that it was a one-sided negotiation. I want it genuinely to have put together something that worked for both people, even if it's not optimal, not the very best outcome I could have made for my side. And maybe that's just because I'm kind of wussy, but it's also it's the kind of atmosphere that I want, not just for the people who work with. Of course, you negotiate with them on the way in, but it's how I want people to think about me afterwards, which is how you negotiate with an employee on the way out. It's how I want the vendors to think about us because they tell other people what it's like to do business with Netflix or whatever organization or company I'm doing. It's just going to sound stupid, but just like, being a good guy goes a long way.
Speaking of negotiation, right? I know you and Reed had a meeting with Bezos and had the opportunity to sell to Amazon. I think it was in 1998, but you decided not to. So I'm just curious why. And then also, what did that look like after you walked out? And now you knew, man, we're going to enter a market where we may be competing against each other.
That does tend to sober you, doesn't it? And
well, I would imagine it focuses you pretty quick.
It certainly does. But that was a really interesting meeting because I'm totally sincere. Everyone, maybe Reed was the only exception, who we told this idea of video run by mail, that'll never work. And imagine how we felt when just 3 months after we'd launched this business, when we get the call from Amazon saying, why don't you come up to Seattle? Jeff would like to chat with you. And we knew immediately what this was about because back then, that Amazon only sold books, if you can imagine there was ever a time where it only sold books. But Jeff had made no secret of the fact that he wanted to be the everything store, and we knew that video and music were the next two dominoes to fall. And so it was pretty obvious that we were a potential acquisition. So here you have this company which everyone has said that'll never work, and all of a sudden someone is interested, and not just someone, Jeff Bezos, who is by far the pioneer, the shining light of e-commerce. So you go, wow, I don't care about the 99 people who said that'll never work if Jeff Bezos perhaps sees something in it. So it was interesting from that perspective. But the other wild thing is, Reed and I flew up to Seattle, and we're navigating our way toward the address that we'd been given. And this is back before GPS and cell phones, of course. We're using a MapQuest printout. And we are in this pretty desperate neighborhood. I mean, people are shooting up in the doorways and the windows are broken. And there's garbage in the streets. And we kept going, are we in the right place? And then, of course, you turn the corner and we see the Amazon building, and it's an old warehouse, and the windows are dirty, and there's someone sleeping in the doorway. And it was just very sobering to go, wow, the pioneer of e-commerce is in a dump. This is not the gleaming corporate campus somehow we expected. And even inside it was like this. The hallways were packed with boxes, and there was pizza every place, and there was 3 or 4 people squeezed into cubicles. And the really interesting defining thing was that the desks. the desks were all used doors
Wow.
that people were sitting at, up on 4x4 legs with a little patch that went where the doorknob had been. But it was interesting because I asked Jeff about what's with the doors, and he said the answer was actually a great one. He said, "This just makes us realize we're going to focus our resources on the things the customers see, not the things the customers don't see." Which was kind of an interest, and which made me feel good about our office back in Scotts Valley, California, with the dirty carpets and the beach chairs because we couldn't afford furniture. So it made me feel better. But the thing is, he hinted about what he thought they'd pay. It wasn't explicit, but it was more like, if this could work out, and it would probably be in this range. And we guessed it would have been maybe $15 to $16 million, which, since I owned a third of the company, would have been pretty good for less than a year's work. But it was an interesting moment in time because we thought, in parentheses or exclamation points, whatever, we thought we had solved all the big problems. We had built the site. We had managed to find a copy of every single DVD in existence. We had built this amazing database with all the film information. We had struck deals with all the consumer electronic companies to put a coupon in their box. And now we were just getting started. So we both, on the way home, Reed and I were kind of looking at each other saying, I don't think we're ready to hand Jeff Bezos the keys.
Mm-hmm. And then what? And then what, right? Because you walk away from, right? Could we have maybe, to clearly you believed in what it could become.
Well, it's interesting because then, of course, we do have to do it. And we do have to do it in the light of the fact that Amazon is going to sell DVDs. And it really is an interesting thing. I talk a bunch in the book about what are some of these ingredients for people taking ideas and successfully making them real. And one of them, a critical one, is focus. And at this time, at that 3-month mark when we were going up and talking to Jeff Bezos, we were getting probably 98% of our revenue from selling DVDs, not renting them. And there was an interesting point where we said, we are in a business which is not our core business, which is going to be taken away from us by Amazon. And most interestingly, it's making it even more harder. It's making it harder for us to figure this rental thing out. It's confusing. There's things you have to do which are suboptimal for the two different things. And it forced us to say, we're going to focus. We're going to pick one thing and do it well. Put all of our resources on it. And it was a tough call because focusing on selling was the natural choice. It was paying 98% of the salaries. But eventually that was going to go away. But focusing all of our effort on the 2% of the business seemed suicidal. But we did the thing that a good entrepreneur would do. And in one particular day, we flipped the switch, walked away from selling DVDs entirely, and then we bet our future that we could somehow figure out a way to make DVD rental by mail work. That took us a year and a half of one failed experiment after another, but eventually we cracked the code.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Well, and you say in the book, which I think is pretty cool, when your dream becomes a reality, you say it doesn't just belong to you. What was it like to watch your idea, right, your dream, your company evolve? I can imagine that can at times be difficult.
It's an interesting thing for a early stage CEO, but it's part of the life of an idea. It's part of the life of a company, which is that at the beginning, you're all generalists. But if you're successful, ironically enough, you now need more specialists, and which means you're no longer the right person. And this was really brought to a head for me. This was a point relatively early in Netflix's history when we were in the process of raising a round of financing. And then one evening I was kind of sitting in my office and the door cracks open and Reed sticks his head in and then kind of delivers those famous words that everyone's heard before, hey, we've got to talk. And your heart sinks a little bit. And Reed comes in, he has a little PowerPoint slideshow, and he begins walking me. It starts out well enough. It's kind of the first couple slides are all how great I've been. But then it veers into errors in judgment. And I go, Reed, I'm not going to sit here and let you pitch me on why I suck, I think were my exact words. Mm-hmm. And he goes, no. But the thing is, Reed and I had this radical honesty with each other. I knew that Reed, if he was seeing problems, he did not have an ulterior motive. He genuinely was concerned. And at first, as he kind of went through the concerns that the problems he was seeing at a small size were going to create problems as they got bigger, I first thought he's going to force me out. He has more stock than I do. He could do that. But then I realized he was saying something very different, which is that he thought we should run the company together. And this comes back to that dream part, because at first it was shocking and not fair. This was my dream, which was to start and run this successful company. But as I thought about it, I really realized there was two different dreams. And there was the dream of me running it, and then there was the dream of it being successful. And as you pointed out, the dream of being successful wasn't just my dream anymore. It was all the employees who had worked nights and weekends. And it was all the people who had given us money. And it was even the customers. And I kind of realized that it was almost inarguable that this company would be stronger with both Reed and I running it. Because Reed wasn't working full-time at the company at the time. And having him in and having us be side by side was hard to argue with. And I kind of realized that I had to put that one dream aside in order to make sure we got the other one right. And if I look back, and this is what having 16 years to look back does, what probably the smartest decision I ever made at Netflix, it was being comfortable with that decision. It didn't happen overnight. It took a bit. But eventually I realized it was the right way. Reed did come in. We did run the company together. And those years were in many ways the renaissance at Netflix. And then if you look at what he's done with the company since I left, boy, it's hard to make an argument that wasn't an amazingly smart thing to have done.
Well, and you said in 2003 you moved on from Netflix. Tell me a little bit about leaving and how did you get clear on that decision that it was time to move on? So
because of when things took place, I was in my late 30s and early 40s when I started and was running Netflix. And I was extremely lucky, and then I'd figured out two really important things about myself, which is what am I good at and what do I love doing? And I was extremely fortunate they were both the same thing. And it was early stage stuff. It was startups. It turns out that I love that process of sitting around a table with really smart people and solving these really interesting new problems. And here's my moment to be a little immodest. I'm actually really good at that. I have these kind of innate skills that lend themselves to that type of problem solving. But when Netflix was now 6-7 years old, and we finally did get to the point we had an IPO, and we finally had the resources to hire amazing people, and we were now turning our sights to fighting huge entrenched competitors, I still loved the company. But I realized that the problems I was solving every day were not necessarily ones that I loved putting my head toward, and quite frankly, that I wasn't that good at. And I realized that what success really is being able to keep doing the things you're good at and the things that you love. And that I really had the flexibility to do that, that the company was in great hands with Reed and the team we brought in, and that I could go off and get back to the thing that I love and I'm good at, and which is, for the most part, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I do get, since I left Netflix about 16 years ago, not only do I get to now spend my days working with these early stage companies and sitting around that same table with the really smart people and helping solve really cool problems, but now I get to leave at 5:00 and they have to stay up.
Which brings me to an interesting question, because I know one of the things you're really proud of is that through all of this, you've stayed married and you're really locked in as a father. How do you manage your energy? How do you manage that balance? How do you lean into all of that? People usually have goals, or they have New Year's resolutions, or they have things that they're challenged to do. And
for me, it's always been about balance. And I love coming to work. I love it, but not everything. The other things, of course, are my family. And that's always been important to me from the very beginning, that I just never wanted to be one of those guys who was on their sixth company, but also on their sixth wife or something. And I had, at the very beginning, from way before Netflix, this policy where every Tuesday night, without fail, at 5:00, I left the office and my wife had a sitter and we would go out and have a date night. And in a startup, which has these unbelievable demands on your time, that is not easy. But I was rigid. If there was a crisis, we're going to get this crisis wrapped up by 5. And Mark, we have to talk. Well, then let's talk on the way to the car.
Right.
But an amazing thing happened is after you've held on tight for 2 or 3 months to this policy, amazingly, people stop asking. And then even better, they begin doing it.
That's cool.
And, we talked earlier about culture, and about culture comes from not what you say, but what you do.
Yep, no question.
I don't know how many companies. I was just reading about, I guess it was WeWork or one of those companies where they're it was one of the big gyms. And they're saying that everyone said how important balance was, but then they put these incredible weird time requirements on all the employees. And I go, there's a perfect example of saying one thing and doing the other.
Sure.
And when people heard me say, listen, balance is important, but more importantly, saw me actually doing it, it was good for me, but also good for everybody.
Yeah, that's cool. It probably helped them do that too. Sure. Actions speak louder than words, man. No question about it.
Anyone who has kids certainly knows how that works.
Absolutely. So I have to ask, I love at the end of the book, you have Randolph's Rules for Success, which was a handwritten list from your dad, from your father, that you've passed on to your kids. So I'm curious, which one of these is your favorite? And what does this list mean to you?
Oh, that's really interesting. It was the first day of the day before I was going to start my first job, and my dad called me in and handed me a yellow piece of paper from a pad where he had just written in pencil what he called the Randolph Rules of Success, and he gave this to me before I began my first job. And my dad was an investment banker, so he very easily could have written this list of, cash flow is king, or, always use debt, not equity, or something like that. But what these rules were things like, always do 10% more than you are asked, or be kind and considerate up and down, or never express opinions on things that you don't know much about. These were basically the rules for being a good person. And that's what I've taken away from it. And so when each of my kids in turn started their first jobs, I gave them a copy of the list.
That's cool.
And it's remarkable because I kind of put it in the book as an afterthought. Because it's actually part of the appendix of, whatever you call it, afterwards of the book.
Sure, the epilogue.
And it's amazing how it's resonated with people. Because these are these universal rules, and they're not rules for business success. They're rules for being successful without being a dick about it, if I can use the language. It comes back to the negotiation piece. It's do unto others. It's amazing. And okay, wow. Now we can wrap this up with the big bang. The real reason I wrote this book is because I wanted to puncture the myths that startups come from the single person who's a genius. I want people to see it's a team effort. I want people to see that these people do struggle with balance. They struggle with, am I the right person? And they struggle with, I want to show that you can actually start a company which has changed the way people consume entertainment, and do it by being a good guy, by having it be a pleasant experience for your employees. And then most importantly, that you can do it while staying married to your best friend and having your kids know you and, as best as I can tell, like you.
That is awesome. So we end with rapid fire. So I'm going to fire off a few quick questions to you, and you just rattle off what comes up. You ready?
Oh, I'll see what I can do. Sure.
First job.
I was a page in a library. I was putting away books. Best job in the world.
Why?
What you're seeing are the books people return. So out of the 150,000 volumes in the library, you're seeing what somebody else was interested in. Incredibly diverse tastes. And since I was pushing this cart around, putting them away, I would leave my shifts carrying a stack of these incredibly eclectic, interesting books. Unbelievably great first job.
That's awesome. One book every leader should read, in addition to yours, clearly.
In addition to mine.
Goes without saying.
I'd read Shoe Dog, Phil Knight's autobiography, founder of Nike, and only because it hammers a lot of the same messages that I'm trying to, which is, what's it really like when you have an idea and you want to make this idea real? And I think that's, in this day of the glorification of the entrepreneur, it's just really kind of refreshing to see someone who's willing to be vulnerable and honest about what really went into getting something off the ground.
Sure. What's the last show you binged watched on Netflix? You know I had to ask that question.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing. BoJack Horseman.
Oh, wow. All right. One thing you can't live without.
A hot tub.
A hot tub. Why? So employees can sit in it and complain?
Oh, no. No, this is for personal.
I'm just kidding.
This is for personal
I'm
consumption.
kidding.
But you're starting off every day by getting up, just getting light and having a chance to sit and reflect. I don't know. It's a 1% problem, but wow, what an amazing, that's my start the day.
That's how you start your day. One thing on your bucket list.
Oh, there's a lot of places that I haven't traveled to that I need to get to. And since my definition of traveling to is way, way beyond just being in the airport and going to the downtown, I got a lot of work ahead of me. I still have not been to the southern half of the African continent. I've never been to India. I got a way to go.
That's awesome. Good. So the show's called Game Changer. So one last question. Who's a game changer, or what game changer inspires you and why?
Richard Branson. Richard Branson, I mentioned earlier that my whole life goal here is balance. And he is someone who demonstrated to me that you can do it, because his balance points, everyone's balance points are different. His are the same as mine. His is business, his is family, and his is what I call feeding the rat. I'm not sure what he calls it, but that scratching that internal itch of adventure. For me, it's climbing or backcountry skiing or mountain biking or surfing or kayaking or whatever. And he's demonstrated quite conclusively that you can do all three of those things and do them, except for the family one where I got him tied. But he can do amazing adventure and build amazing businesses and do it by being sincere and honest and connecting with people and giving people autonomy to make decisions, giving them freedom and responsibility.
That is cool. Marc, thanks so much. That Will Never Work. I love the book. It's a great read. I recommend it to our listeners. And you are a busy man, so thanks for taking a minute. Appreciate it.
Wally, what a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for your time as well.
Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.